daughter is 18 and a senior, which is a very grieving thing for me to say. And I have a son who is 16, which keeps reminding me that he'll be 17 over 2019, which means driver's license. Again, another point of grieving for me. And then I have a 13-year-old, and then an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. So that's my group. So if we could, real quick, just go around, give our names and just the kids that we have. All right?
My name is Tracy. I have a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old.
I'm Liz, and I have 4 kids, a 13-year-old who's Carly, a 10-year-old who's Aaliyah, a 8-year-old Lucas, and a 3-year-old Lila.
Sharky and I have no kids.
All right. I love your Barcelona sweatshirt.
Thank you.
Jim, 3 girls, 23, 18, and 16.
Good. We'll jump back there.
Emily, I have a 10-month-old, a 4-year-old, 10-month-old, 4-year-old, 12, 14, and 20.
Wow.
My name is Ruby. I have a 16-year-old, 13-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 5-year-old.
Great. Yeah.
I'm Darian. I have a 10-year-old girl and a 13-year-old boy.
Great. Great.
Julia, I have 15-year-old, 10-year-old, 7-year-old, and 2-year-old.
Nice.
Seth, we have 13 year-old boy, 10-year-old girl, 7-year-old girl, and a 3-year-old.
Eric, and we have a 14-year-old boy, a 13-year-old girl, and an 11-year-old girl.
We have a 13-year-old and 2-year-old, and a 6-year-old girl, and just turned 5-year-old girl.
Great.
Mike and Kelly, we have 3 girls. Our oldest is 14, and we have twins that are 12.
Dave and Lindsay, we have a 12-year-old girl and a 9-year-old boy.
Hi. I have 3 children in their early 40s, but I have 12 grandchildren, so.
All right.
Yeah, Ed and Lisa, we have 4 girls, almost 11, almost 12, almost 13, and 15.
All right.
Hi, I'm Marianne. I have Giovanna, who's 10, soon to be 11. I'm raising my granddaughter.
All right. Thanks, Marianne. And then Caleb.
I'm Caleb, and I have an 8-year-old girl and a 6-year-old girl.
And we had somebody else come in over here.
Oh, yeah. I'm Jude, and I have 4 clowns, 4 grandsons. You laugh, it's true.
All right. So I know you heard a little bit about the milestones, and I just want to remind you just what the milestone pathway is. So these are 8 stages or life markers for the equipping of the next generation. Right? So we're trying to look at key points of development that kind of go within age ranges, so that we would, during that season of life, be looking to match that with some significant points of spiritual formation, and then marking those milestones with some way of kind of stamping that out. So some form of celebration or some form of expression with each of the milestone. And then the milestones all have then competencies with them. Right, so in order to walk out that milestone, there's handles for that. There's things to be working on, things to be developing. So as you go to the different sessions, you will get an idea of what are those competencies. So today, what we're going to do is we are going to look at the milestone related to commitment to purity. And then we're going to really talk about all the competencies related to that, but I want to drill in on one particular competency. But what I want to do is be able to have some time to answer questions. Because the goal here is to give you some tools that can move towards implementation within your home, and also us being able to talk. I'm not the only one with parenting experience in this room, and so as we went around, I mean, there's collective wisdom here from either our successes or our failures that we can share together. So I know that Seth even started out with, hey, here's a question, I'd love to kind of throw this out and learn from some people. So I'd like you to have some of those questions in mind. Yeah, there should be a handout. Does everybody have that handout? I think we have one more, too.
Did you get one, Judy?
Oh, no,
Another one there.
Thank you.
Hand that back. Thanks, Tracy. All right, so how about I pray for us, and then we will talk about the milestone number 5, commitment to purity. So Jesus, we want to learn from you. We want to learn of your ways. Jesus, you walked through this milestone. You grew up, and so you walked through these various life stages. So you are acquainted with what we are dealing with, and so I pray, Jesus, that we would learn of you. We would learn your ways, your pattern, and we would receive from you the ever-present help that you are. So thank you, Jesus. I want to thank you for the word that we received already this morning. So as we come to this, I pray that you would guard us from now saying, okay, now it's time to be practical. Now it's time for us to be in control again. So I pray that we would be able to walk in this with a sense of knowing what is our role in leadership. And our role is not to control. Our role is not to manufacture something. But our role is to lead well and create environments for transformation to happen. But you are the one that's in charge of maturity. You are the one that is developing our children. So our responsibility is to partner with your work. So I pray that you would help us do that at this very critical life stage. So thank you, Jesus, for this group of people. I pray that you would lead us, God, and we would follow. Amen. Amen. So this particular milestone is kind of a milestone that represents a significant transition, right? So you did preparation to adolescence, and now kind of moving towards those teenage years, towards adulthood, and so it's looking at this particular issue of sex and sexuality as a key issue to be addressed, right? So this is kind of like the you get on the airplane and you have to have your seat in the proper position, and for the ride into those teenage years. That's what my point is today, is that we would kind of be poised, positioned for the takeoff into leading our children on that ride into their teenage years, particularly around this issue of sex and sexuality. I think we are very much in a overly sexed culture, but here's what I want to avoid. I don't want commitment to purity to be a statement of we want to avoid the negative. Right? I think rather we want to help our children know what it means to live out their God-given design as male and female. And I think I would rather us move towards the positive rather than live in fear of the negative. So that's part of my goal here. Isn't simply to say how do we say no to sexual temptation, but in saying no to sexual temptation, what are we saying yes to? Right? We are saying yes to living in God's design for the male and living in God's design for the female. So that's kind of the paradigm that I'm using as we think through this. So it's not just simply about sex and sexuality. It's about growing in the Imago Dei, in the image of God. So when we think about this period of time, right? So some characteristics of adolescence that I think is important for us to be aware of is during this stage, which we have, what do we have it as? What, 11 to 13, something like that. During this stage, our children are definitely facing a greater awareness of peers, right? A greater awareness. I was laughing about, like, it was during this stage of my life where I actually decided to wear something intentionally to try and look nice, as opposed to, what can I, how fast can I run, and what's comfortable to get dirty in, or whatever. I actually said, I want to look nice, right? And so I tell my kids the things that I was wearing, and they laugh at me, and appropriately so. But they're facing those peer pressures, right? Like, how should I look? How should I talk? How should I dress? How should I perform? And all of that is affected by media, advertising, consumerism, the opinions of others, right? So they are beginning to ask the questions like, am I competent? Am I desirable? Right? And they're asking those questions of these peers that they now are growing increasingly aware of their presence and their influence in their life. They're starting to think and dream about their future. They're starting to think about maybe marriage, children, and fears at this age are, I think, increasingly getting rational. They are usually connected to something pretty real for them, pretty concrete for them, and maybe they don't know how to articulate it, but it's pretty real. Their minds have moved more towards abstract thought, not just concrete thinking. So they're asking the why question. Their interests are becoming, like you see an interest of that's more individual, right? Like I said about where I was choosing how to dress. That was something that I wanted to make those choices rather than, what's just laid out for me, or, something like that. So I'm moving more towards being an individual, moving in a degree of independence. And I think there's something that we need to be aware of is our kids are now picking up on really what is authentically the things that we value. They're definitely reading that. They're definitely making value assessments about us, about the things that we've been leading them in, and they are going through crazy physical changes, right? I mean, they're just what's going on in their body. Just new things are happening, and they have to figure out that. They have to figure out those hormones and hair in various places and all of those crazy aspects that like they have no real paradigm for, and now they're confronted with it. So those are some of the changes of this particular age. Sorry, let me skip down here. So what we've identified is that there are 3 core competencies for preparing for adolescence, right? Or preparing, not preparing for adolescence. 3 core competencies in moving into this commitment to purity. And so the first one is that we would know our design as male and female. And so as parents, we want to affirm God's design as male and female, that God has a plan for their body. So all of these changes that they're experiencing, that's part of God's design for them to grow as male, to grow as female. And He is bringing our children into manhood and womanhood. And with that comes certain parts of the image of God that is to be revealed in them, and it's a beautiful part of God's plan for them. So during this stage, we want to be affirming that. We want to be talking about that. We want to have those sorts of conversations, which leads me into the second core competency, is that we want to create an environment of honest conversations on all subjects. Right? So if you only are trying to have honest conversations about sex, that's a pretty lousy foundation. Right? Like, you need to have conversations on all subjects, which would include sex and sexuality. So you want to create that kind of environment with those lines of communication being open, with appropriate expressions of emotion, right? Appropriate expressions of concern. I remember being jealous when my daughter, who's now 18, wasn't comfortable talking to me about, some of the female issues that she was facing. I'm like, hey, why can't we talk about it? My wife's like, Greg, that is so awkward for her to talk to you about. Because we had cultivated such an open, kind of dialogue where we could just talk about anything, and I love that part of our relationship. And so I understood that, there's certain things that are a little bit uncomfortable for her to talk about with me. But the point is, you want to initiate conversation, and you want to get what are they thinking, what are they feeling, and you also you want to be a safe place for those things. So if every time your child tells you something that they're thinking, you shut them down, or, oh, you shouldn't think that, or don't feel that way, well, as you get into the harder conversations, you're not going to be a safe place to have, dialogue. So you want to be a safe place for your kids to be able to talk. Now, that doesn't mean you don't bring correction as needed. That doesn't mean you don't bring teaching. But it does mean that you start out with lots of listening, right? So you don't create this environment where as soon as they bring something, you automatically bring correction without further asking questions. So I think that's a very important part of a core competency at this stage, is having an environment of honest conversations on all subjects. All right? So the third core competency, and this is the one I want to spend a little bit of time on, the third core competency is establishing a pattern of your child growing in God's design for both maturity and responsibility and independence and privilege. All right, so I want to try and explain those things, but let me first give you an example of this. This to me is one of the most beautiful passages of Scripture in regards to parenting, and it's one of the few stories we have of Jesus' life when he was growing at this particular stage. So Jesus, he's age 2. You remember the story? And so Jesus is, I'm sorry, not age 2, he's age 12. And he goes back, the family makes the trip to the temple. The family leaves, right? Jesus stays behind. And so Jesus has left his parents, right? He's starting to move in independent decision making, right? Moving away from Mary and Joseph. And they find out that Jesus is not with them. They obviously panic, like, first rule of parenting, where is your child? They don't know. And by the way, it's God's son. Offers conversation with God. Remember that Messiah you gave us? Oh, no. So they find Jesus. He's at the temple. He's in dialogue with these people. And do you remember, when they kind of bring some correction to him, do you remember the line that Jesus gives them? That he must be about something. You remember what it was? He's got to be about his Father's business, right? So what Jesus is saying is, like, yes, Mary and Joseph, right? I've been following your leadership, but as I'm growing here, I've got to be about my Father's business. He has to move growing in independence to live according to God's plan for him, as opposed to Mary and Joseph's plan. And as you track Jesus' life, that becomes very significant, where at one point in time, Mary is opposed to Jesus' ministry, and Jesus has to reject, that he's like, who is my mother and my brothers, right? So Jesus redefines family, but by the grace of God, Mary seems to come around there at the end, and we see her following Jesus at the end of his life. But the point being, at this stage, right, Jesus is asserting his independence from Mary and Joseph. And I think that's the same thing that is very appropriate for our children. That they will start learning to move towards independence. And what I think is fascinating about this story is what happens after this. Does Jesus launch his ministry? Right, at age 12, like he's out on his own? No, but he says, I have to be about my Father's business, but then he goes back and submits himself to Mary and Joseph. So there's still more maturing he's going to do under their leadership, but there's now this introduction of him moving in independence. And so then verse 52 says, and Jesus increased in both wisdom and in stature, in favor with God and with man. Right? So that is our model. That children would move from dependence and independence, that move from dependence towards independence, would move from immaturity to maturity, and so that the teenage years would be described as them increasing in those areas, right? Increasing in favor with God and with man, as our children would move from dependence to independence, from immaturity to maturity, right? And even think of the stages they've gone through so far, right? When they're first born, 100% dependent, right? Like they don't have, like they can't do anything for themselves. They are entirely dependent, on you. And so even now, you've seen, hopefully, some moves towards independence as they have picked up certain responsibilities, as they have grown, as they have matured. So the vision that we have, or the standard that we have, is that our children would increase in wisdom, right? In wisdom, so they would be wise, right? They would be discerning people. They would grow physically in stature, and they would do that in favor with our Father and with man. I mean, that's a beautiful vision for the teenage years. That our kids would grow in wisdom, that they would be wise, right? Discerning people, independent decision makers, right? So they would be growing in wisdom, they would be growing physically, right? In stature, and they would do that in such a way that they're growing in favor with our Father, but also with man. And that's the picture that we have of Jesus. And I say that because I want to raise our expectations for this season of life. Right? It's not just about keeping our kids from avoiding the big sins. Right? But that there would be, because that's really where we are culturally. There's very low expectations for our children, for our teenagers. So I want to reject the notion that, and you hear people say this, like, well, wait until they grow up, wait until they're teenagers. Enjoy them while they're little, right? Because once you hit that teen years, there's no more joy in parenting. That is not true, by the way. I have found that with every stage of my children's development, it has brought me closer to them. Right? So as you cultivate those kind of relationships, then they grow into people that you would want to spend time with, would want to be with. They can, they're capable of abstract thought, and you can dialogue about things, and you can enjoy things together. It's actually this first stage of my daughter, heading away from home. I'm like, wait a minute, I don't see how is this helping our relationship? That's the grieving part for me. I got to go to that milestone. I haven't done that one yet. I think I've been trying to pretend like it's not really happening. But the teenage years are not a vacation from responsibility, but a training ground for future leaders. And prolonged adolescence is not developmentally helpful. I really do not believe. I've heard people talk about how that's helpful for people to find their career. I also think it's very destructive because they're not embracing responsibility. And then people are hurt, right? People are, I pause because so many examples run through my mind of basically men behaving like boys and how that wreaks havoc on other people. So I'm not buying into that prolonged adolescence is developmentally helpful. I think it's a recent invention. I think the expectation in our culture for teenagers is that they're moody, they're lazy, they're not productive, and people have lowered themselves to meet those standards. And as long as they stay out of trouble, don't get pregnant, and get through school, then we're satisfied. Let's just reject that standard out of hand. Like that's not our goal here, and that's clearly not the biblical picture of the kind of expectations that we would want to have. Your children can do incredible things. They can do important things. They have capacity to impact the world that they live in. They have capacity to lead. They have capacity to teach. So I don't want to simply survive the teenage years. I want us as a church family to be able to thrive through the teenage years. So Jesus had a growing sense of his identity, and God has a vision, right, for your child growing in their identity as sons and daughters of God. And so that's what we want to embrace. We want to embrace a bigger vision for their lives. And just as kind of an aside, I think that some of the issues that we're dealing with in terms of sexual brokenness and rise in terms of pornography, in terms of hindrances in people being able to even relate in a healthy way, I think it's because in some ways we have created these bubbles that our kids live in, and they're not able to write good stories for themselves, right? Like maybe they're so busy or they're so sheltered that they're not able to really experience real stories for them to live in, right? They're not able to walk out their God-given design, maybe because we have them too busy, maybe because we protected them too much. And so they're trying to find ways to figure out, how do I feel alive? How do I feel like, a man that God's calling me to be, or a woman that God's calling me to be? And we got to give them narratives that are bigger than what they can just get their hands around. So I think there's something that we want to help our children experience real things in life, help them write good stories for themselves, and I think that will help them affirm their masculinity and their femininity, rather than being busy with what's trivial. All right, so how do we change the culture of our home to establish a pattern of a child growing in God's design for both maturity, responsibility, and independence and privilege? So I got 3 points that I want to give on that. First of all is we have to have a vision, right? We have to have vision for what we want for the teenage years. So even what I just said, right? So if we want our kids to be able to write a good story, right? They need to feel the weight of some responsibility, and we have to lead them into that. We have to have vision for that. So let me give you an example. So my 15-year-old, well now 16-year-old, so my two oldest ones, they led a winter camp in Bridgeton over Christmas, right? So Jude led a soccer camp, Isabella led a ballet camp. And that was in conjunction with the Bridgeton church plant that's going on, but they led it, right? So they led it because I offered it to them, but it was their responsibility. And I feel like they got to use their God-given design. It was risky, I wanted to control how they did it. And hey, did you make these phone calls? Did you write out the vision for it? Did you contact this person, right? But I had to let them feel the weight of it. But by giving it to them, letting them feel the weight of it, I feel like it gives them dignity and honors God's design in their life of, I've been given some responsibility here. Right? And I think those are the kinds of things, right, that we can use to help our kids know, like there's a design on your life. But we have to have vision for that. Right? You have to have vision for what is it that you want from your teenage years. And I think, telling stories, watching movies together, having conversations about the things that you want to celebrate, doing faith talks, God sightings, like using those tools around what is the vision you have for their teenage years. So fill their minds with those sorts of characteristics, those sorts of stories. Make them their heroes, right? By sharing good stories with them. But first of all, we have to have vision and then cast that vision to our children. Number 2 is I highly recommend you lead your children to master something. Like help them be disciplined. Whatever that thing is, and not everything. Don't make them master everything, but help them find something that they can then master. And then they get to learn the discipline, the hours that it takes for mastery. Right? I remember coaching high school soccer, and I had really worked these kids. I'd worked them really hard. And there's a parent that came to me and said, my son should be on, he's a senior, he deserves to be starting. I said, I'm sorry, I don't make decisions based on age. Right? Like there's a JV team. If you just, they can go to, but this is the varsity team, so we're going to make decisions based on, like, who has worked the hardest in practice, they're going to get the reward. And what I said to the parent was, your son will not be satisfied with that. Like, if he gets on the playing field knowing that somebody's on the bench that has worked harder than him, that deserves the spot, he's not going to be satisfied with it. So what was cool is then the kid, worked hard, and then he earned his time on the field, right? Like, he had to do the discipline to get that, and then he was rewarded for his hard work. So we want to lead our kids to move into mastery of something, right? So Hebrews 12:11, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields a peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. All right, number 3, lovingly lead a process instead of impatiently demanding a performance. All right, lovingly lead a process instead of impatiently demanding a performance. So let me make sense of those things that I have on there of privilege and responsibility. Right, so I always get my X's and Y's mixed up, right? This is the privilege side. Is that how I have it written on there?
Yes.
Right, so privilege, and then I have maturity. So the idea is that you would leverage these two things together. So then you have responsibility, and then freedom, right?
Maturity.
I have maturity here? Yeah. I got these backwards? Alright, so I have maturity here.
That's independence.
Independence up here? Okay. Thank you. Alright, so the idea is that with responsibility, as your child grows in responsibility, then they receive privilege. Right? So it's leveraging those two things together. So with responsibility comes privilege. When there's not demonstrated responsibility, therefore there is not privilege. Right? Like, if we just get that in our minds, right? So what would be some privileges here? What are privileges that your children have? Cell phone is definitely a privilege. It is not a right. It is not a necessity. Right? All right, so cell phone, good. What else?
Video games.
Yeah, okay. Games, video games. I'll just put games of any kind. Right? Yep, television, good.
Increase respect for privacy, like locking bedroom doors.
Yeah, okay. So how about I put autonomy? Great. What's not a privilege? So love, not a privilege. Let me say this. Never leverage relationship. Right? I see parents do that all the time. What they leverage is their love, their affection, their delight. No. Right? That's where you get into what we heard in that time over there, where it's performance based. You love me if I perform, if I'm responsible enough, then I'm loved. No. We don't want that. So when you're bringing correction, right? When you're talking about their failure, it should never be from the standpoint of disgust, shame, right? Like you're an advocate for them growing in these areas. Food, shelter, right? But yeah, let's keep going. What are some other privileges?
Sports.
Sports? Good. I'm going to put this one as a category, choices. So the selection of what food they eat, the selection of what clothes they wear, those are not rights, those are privileges. By the way, like that thing of the cell phone, my goodness, how many children have cell phones that have not demonstrated responsibility for them? As such a dangerous tool put in their hands without demonstrated responsibility. And then cell phones can get more specific, right? You have cell phones that you can talk on where it's a phone, but then you have cell phones that are smartphones which can do really anything I ever could have dreamed of as a child. Like it has the capacity to do, like what we had of giant computers they would have in their in their pocket, right? So you also have different types of privilege even within those cell phones. So for example, right? So my kids were behind the curve on cell phones, and they didn't get a cell phone until they demonstrated responsibility like they needed one, because they would be home and they would be the primary child care for the other children, and we didn't have a home phone, right? So they demonstrated responsibility enough to care for their sibling, so I needed to be able to get a hold of them. That doesn't mean they need a smartphone. That means they need to be able to call me on a regular phone. Right? So leveraging responsibility, right, with privilege and bringing those two things together. To the point where if there's not demonstrated responsibility, then there's not privilege. And other ways that I would communicate that, like early on, is there should be a natural connection between these two things. Right? So, if, like when they're younger, if the only form of discipline you have is time out, right, then you got to start thinking more natural consequences, because the natural consequence is not for every step of immaturity is go sit on the steps for 2 minutes, right? Like then that just becomes a punishment. You need to leverage consequences. So we want, with responsibility comes privilege. And you're leveraging those things back and forth for the development of your child, so that as they grow in responsibility, they grow in privilege. And the goal here is that they would grow in independence and maturity. So we create an environment where this is constant. And we have to, I remember my parents saying things like, Greg, you're never going to be able to watch TV for the rest of your life. I'm like, I don't think you're going to stick to that one. Right? And also what that meant is they brought a consequence to try and get me to do a behavior, but not to instill some sort of degree of responsibility in me. Like they wanted me to just do something, so they would crank up the pressure. So this takes constant calibration. I think like an Etch-a-Sketch, you got to do both of them. Like we're doing both of these all the time, of privilege and responsibility. And you want to celebrate this, right? Because you're moving your child towards independence and towards maturity. So you want to lead them in increasing responsibility that leads to maturity. Okay. All right, so here's the thing. So in this process, right, in order for them to really grow in independence and in maturity, it's not just about demonstrated responsibility, which could be measured by behavior. Like what you're really wanting to transfer is certain values, right, that inform those behaviors. So along the lines of talking about responsibility and privilege, that can't just be let me leverage the cell phone, right? But let's talk about the values that are driving your irresponsibility Or another way of saying it is you've got to get to talking about the issues of their heart. Right? You've got to get to why are they demonstrating responsibility or why are they not demonstrating responsibility. Those are essential conversations to have. Right? Because the goal here is not just, again, to have behaviors that are in line, but to be mature means you pass on certain values by which then they can move in independence. Right? I remember as a parent, when I started facing these parenting questions, I had no idea what to do. So I got this book, and it was a giant book. It was like, I don't know, it seemed like it was about as thick as that basket. And it was by Dr. Dobson, right? So it was like, I don't know, 1,000 different parenting issues, and you would look up the parenting issue, and it would tell you what to do, right? So, like, I did that a couple of times, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of helpful. But then I started to get frustrated with it, because I'm like, you're telling me what to do, but I have no idea why. Right? So I need to answer the why question so that when I'm confronted with things that don't fit into the glossary of Dr. Dobson's book, I know how to lead my children. Well, that's the same thing. If we want our children to grow in independence and maturity, right, then we have to pass on those treasures, those values. Well, that's going to be having conversations that deal not just simply with the privilege and the responsibility, but what's the heart behind those things. Yes.
Could you just give us an example of what that would look like?
To have that conversation?
Right, like is it, because if I were to talk to my child about the responsibility, like, it just gives...
That would be great. Thinking of an example. So an example would be, all right, so we had the conversation, my mind is so fixed on the problem that I was writing down in the inherent things for me to get examples outside of that one. But so with one of my children in particular, I'm really struggling with this particular child to accept the responsibilities of his schoolwork, right? And so it's not a lack of ability, it's not a lack of conceptual understanding. It's an unwillingness to come under the authority of what is expected of him. So what we keep circling around is the removal of privileges, right? So one of the privileges that, like, for much of last year, he wasn't able to come on Tuesdays to be part of the worship team for youth ministry. I'm like, I really want him to be able to be part of that, but that was a privilege that I felt like if you can't demonstrate responsibility here, that's a leadership responsibility that I would pull away there. So those would be how I would do that, but then I would have to say, like, what's the obstacles for you? Like, what's going on that you're unwilling to dot the I's and cross the T's, right? So I have to, like, press into what's the obstacle in here, because it's not it's not a skill, it's not a talent, it's not an inability. What's the heart behind that? So we would have lots of conversations. We would pray about that, but it would be trying to understand the why question in regards to that. Is that helpful?
Yes.
Okay. One of the things I want you to see with this too is as you parent your child, right, towards independence and maturity, right, as you do that, one of the things that transitions here, right, and you know this already, is control, which is really an illusion anyway, to influence. Right? So when they're younger, right, you're much more in control of being able to leverage those things. As they get older, it's more a place of bringing influence. Right? Which is what you want as they would increase in their independence and their maturity. Yeah, do you have a question?
Yes.
So I just have a question. I have a 16-year-old who's very, very responsible when it comes to getting work done, getting, things done, getting to school, doing all the stuff he needs to do. He's a very smart kid. Is it bad to say that, like, just because they're responsible? Because I think sometimes he comes across like, hey, I've done this, this, and this. Can't I should be able to have this privilege or whatever. Like, sometimes I get a little bit. I'm like, I can see what he's saying, but then I'm like, well, no, but I don't know. There's just like there's a line there because I'm like, well, you're still 16. You're still. You still kind of have to live under my house. You still kind of have to respect that sometimes I'm going to say no. So, I don't want to say that that's control, but I'm not really sure if it's always.
Yeah, so just to be clear, when I say control to influence, there's certainly some boundaries within that. So, as he's in your house, that doesn't mean, well, you're 16, you're doing a good job in school. If you want to go buy alcohol, go ahead. I'm fine with that. Right? Like, so there still would be, some boundaries, within that, and you would use your discretion. I would say I'm walking through some similar things where it'd say there's some demonstrated areas of maturity, but the privilege you're asking for doesn't match your current level of responsibility. Right? You're doing great here, but you're still 16 years old, right? And a 16-year-old doesn't need that sort of responsibility in their life or that sort of privilege in their life. That's still so you're doing great for the stage of development that you're in, so you're going to have privileges that are appropriate for that stage of development. So, was there another question over here?
I was just gonna say that sometimes I struggle with that, like a little bit of this model, because I don't think the only thing I'm going for in my kid's life is responsibility. So like knowing how to balance that, does that make sense? Like for example, some of these things that are privileges also hit on other things. Like I want them to play on sports teams. I think that teaches responsibility, and I think it's like healthy for them. I want them to have like game times together as our family because I want to have like fun together with them. So like it's hard for me to sometimes see some of how that actually pans out in real life, and sometimes I feel like I lose consequences because I'm also trying to aim for other things. Like, does that make sense?
Sure. Yep. But I would even say, I would just, what you're saying is the same model, you're just nuancing it differently.
Okay.
Right? So even with sports, right, I wouldn't just count that as a privilege. Right? There's things that I want to see developed in them. So I've actually forced my kids, I forced Jude to play on a soccer team because he was going through conflict with that coach. Right? So that was a developmental thing that really, it wasn't a privilege for him. It was actually more responsibility. Right? And I would say the same thing with game time as a family. Sometimes that's something you want them to grow and you want them to learn. I would agree with you. Kelly, you going to say something?
I just have another question.
Yeah.
Right, so you were talking about the responsibility part and how you don't just want to be cable there, you want to get to the heart of the issue. So say you have a child who's very, very responsible. How do you get to why?
That's excellent. Yeah, that's good. So my oldest, so when I give examples of negative things, rarely will be my oldest child because she just doesn't do a lot of them, right? But I think that's because that's not always from a good place in her heart. A lot of times that's just she wants to be a people pleaser and wants to kind of fly below the radar. So I really hate this, but I'm going to put on a nice face, right? So there's heart issues that need to be dealt with, in that place. So one of the things that I try to do is I try and look for it, and it's not going to be obvious, right? So if you watched Isabella most of the time, you're going to see everything looks great, but I know my daughter, so I know when there's a bad attitude that's brewing below the surface, and there's some impatience, and it's not always going to be obvious to most people, but I know that, and so then I would go after those issues of her heart. So it's also not just simply, so the way that I would say it is, with responsibility, right, it's not just did you get it done, but what was the disposition of your heart in getting it done? right? So you're just defining what maturity would look like, and maturity would look like being a wholehearted lover of Jesus in all the things that we do, right? So then that goes at, then you would be able to go after those particular, those particular needs.
Can you talk a little bit about celebration? Maybe I'm going to add.
Yes. Thank you. So celebration for this one. Let me give. I'll give you two that my wife and I did for these. So I really would lead this commitment to purity with my sons. She would lead it. She led it with my oldest, and she will lead it with my youngest daughter. So for her, she did something called 8 Great Dates, which would be an excellent resource that if I was more responsible, I would have it here to show you. But so what it is 8 Great Dates that she did with my daughter Isabella, and it would lay out over 8 times that they would be together. Here's key conversations that they would have along the way. So the idea isn't to have a single conversation, but it's to have multiple conversations. So they would go out together, they would listen to this material, and they would be able to dialogue together around this. And really for us, the goal again was not just to avoid the negatives of sexual sin. It was more to what's vision for you're growing as a man, you're growing as a woman. Let's be committed to that work in your life. So that's what she did with Isabella, was she used 8 Great Dates. I use something called Passport to Purity. That's the one I chose, which I think they have that for boys and girls. And I'll be honest with you, I feel like the material itself is designed for 7 or 8 year olds in terms of the way they package the material. But the content, I think, is 14, 15-year-old content. So anyway, I waited until my kids were 13, so I just did that with my 13-year-old this past year. We went away for the weekend, and we worked through these various sessions, talked about all sorts of issues related to sex and sexuality. It really does focus on the issue of sex and sexuality. I broadened it to talk more about issues of masculinity, God's design for him as a man, not just in that particular area. But it forced us to talk about things that we wouldn't typically have talked about, right? And things that, one of the values that my wife and I had related to this particular topic is before we talk to our kids about deviant sexual behavior, right? We wanted them to understand God's design for sex and sexuality. So that's why we wanted to have intentional time to just create space to talk about these things, for us to get some good truth. So what Law and I did is I took Law to Shenandoah National Park outside of Washington, D.C. We did some hiking, and then we would do these sessions in the car, and I got us a really cheap hotel room, and so we were in there for a little bit, and then we'd go out and do some more hikes, and so it created a time where it wasn't rushed. So I don't think, there were times where it was uncomfortable because of our subject matter, but we had enough space to laugh together, enjoy time together, and have these conversations. So those were that's how my wife and I have done it related to the celebration around commitment to purity. And I found with my older son, it was a good, we look back to it as a good anchor of things that he is doing now based on commitments he made then, related to, we talk about conversations like dating, set conversations for sexual temptation, right? So we would be able to talk about that. How's that going in your life? Have those kind of honest conversations together. So I think that gets us through the material that I had for you. So we still have about 12 minutes for questions. Yeah, Marianne.
Back on what you were talking about there. So I struggle with when it comes to taking something away because of you know, her mouth, mostly her mouth, 90% of the time is her tone of voice, not always what comes out of it, but her tone of voice. And then when I'm trying to figure out, well, a lot of times it's I'm so mad, I'm just blurting out whatever I'm going to take away or whatever. But then sometimes I think about like going to 4-H and life skills is teaching her. They teach them that in that program. So sometimes I'm struggling with, because she likes to go to 4-H, so is it appropriate to take away the 4-H, or is it appropriate to put her in her room, or sometimes I have her write, because I think sometimes if she writes it so many times, maybe it'll sink in. So I have no idea how to, sometimes the consequence, it usually doesn't work, to tell you the truth, and I don't know what kind of consequence for her action to do.
So this is the key word for me when I think of consequences, right? Is that how you spell natural? Mm-hmm. Right? So natural consequences. So I don't think punishment, I think natural consequences. Punishment would be what hurts. Take that away. So I remember.
I want to hurt her. At that point, I want to hurt her.
Right. Let me just say, that's totally understandable, right? That's that sense of justice inside of you where there's been an infraction. That's totally understandable. But that won't necessarily train her in righteousness, right?
That's not working.
Yeah, that doesn't work, right? So, and a lot of times, just so you know, we punish our kids, right, with our tone of voice, right, with our attitude towards them, right? That's not what that's going to do. Is just teach them to respond negatively to those things, right? My goal, and this is hard, my goal is to not punish my kids with my tone of voice, but to lovingly come alongside of them and let the consequence do the work, right? Let the natural consequence bring the sort of discomfort that it needs to bring in order to train them in whatever the value is that I'm wanting to train them in, right? So like I coach soccer, and I had this one kid that really struggled. I mean, he just was, he struggled academically, he struggled socially. The one thing that seemed to click in his mind was the ability to run down the field and pass and kick a soccer ball, right? But he would get in trouble with school, and every time something would come up at school, they would take away soccer. Take away soccer, take away soccer. Like, why are you doing that? Like, how is that helping him grow by just bringing punishment right to him? So we don't want to just think punishment, we want to think training. So my question to all of you would be, what's a good natural consequence for, like, talking back or tone of voice? Any thoughts on that one?
One thing we do in our house is, like, if they're talking nasty, I'll put them in talking timeout. Like, you can, like, you're not allowed to talk at all for a set amount of time.
Oh, that would kill her.
That's good.
Like, I don't want to hear your voice at all.
It's hard to enforce.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it is hard to
For
enforce.
one of mine in particular.
Yeah, because it's like, if they're defiant about it, like, it's kind of like if your kids are obedient and they'll take the consequence, then it's okay. But if they're not, then it's like, and if they keep testing you, it's like, well, what do I do now? Like, they're pushing.
They'll be like, well, can I say I love you?
Right.
You want me to say I love you? My daughter would totally say.
So sometimes when we're at home, I'll be like, you have to be in your room then. Like, you can't be with us. Like.
Yeah. So then you keep, moving that back. So I would also add to that is what I often will use is what I call vanity, where it's not going to work, right? So if she uses a nasty tone of voice, sorry, I'm not going to respond to that, right? So why don't you do that again? I still don't like your tone of voice. Let's try that one again. Nope, we're not there yet. Let's try that one again, right? So and in time she's like, that's not going to work. Right, my mom's not responding to this tone of voice.
Yeah, because my response is I feel like I have to be worse than she is. So I turn into the 8-year-old and she's 10.
Right. Yes.
So then I get really frustrated with myself.
Right.
Because
that's right.
And then I beat myself up after everything calms down.
My suggestion for you in that one, Marianne, would to be repentant. Like, Giovanna, I should never talk to you like that. It's so inappropriate for me to talk like that. I'm really sorry. I should never speak to you that way. And I apologize. I'm going to do my best not to. I'm going to ask God to help me not to respond in ways that are negative.
Patience is I feel like I had a lot more years ago, and the patience is very difficult.
Yeah. But it's not insurmountable. You have the Holy Spirit inside of you. You can do that. But it'll require a degree of intentionality for you to be like, oh, all right, I don't want to match that, because what you're doing for her is you're reinforcing, right? By you speaking back to her that way, then you're just creating that cycle of conversation.
Yeah, and I think like in the beginning I'm okay, because I remember I'm the dog. Okay, I'm keeping it, and then after it happens 2 or 3 times, I lose it.
I find for me, if I don't have a good natural consequence to respond to whatever the expectation is, then that's when the pressure starts rising for me. Because then I'm going to go to my tool belt, whatever's the fastest tool, right? Which would be I get big or I'll get louder, right? But what that I teach my kids is obedience comes when dad gets loud. Right. And I don't want that. I don't want that for our home. I don't want that for them.
Right.
I want them to be trained in righteousness by what are the natural consequences.
Right, because I never was in a home where I've always been in a peaceful home, and this last 2-3 years there's not peace, and I can't. And I try to explain to her I can't live in a home where there's not peace. I don't like the yelling. I don't like it. I don't like to live like that.
Yeah.
And she just seems to just push. I mean, she's gotten a little better lately, but she just seems like she knows what to say to push me, and how to say it. It's relentless, and the consequence, I feel like, just doesn't seem to work sometimes. And you don't know what consequence to do sometimes to make it work.
Well, and I would say if the tone of voice thing, or like like I would use either what Lily's suggesting or what I'm suggesting, just like, let's go through that again, and do that with a calm voice. So the 2 things I would say is lead by example. So you, even if she's pressuring, don't ratchet it up, and if you do, repent, right? And then the other one is like think of ahead of time. Here's my consequence for that tone of voice.
Right, I don't think ahead. I'm just acting on my.
One of the things that I say to my kids is I never respond to the whiny voice. Like that's just an odd. Like nope, I'm not. So you're gonna keep saying that till I get it in an appropriate way.
Right.
Then we'll talk.
And the other thing is she's always ready to. She can bring the feelings up and down, and she's apologizing, and she's sorry, and don't even look at me. I can't even look at her, because I'm just so, like, up here, so mad. And she's like, I'm sorry, Mom, do you forgive me? I'm sorry, you forgive me? I'm like, please just get away from me. That's how bad it gets, really,
Yeah, so I think it's okay to get space, but I would use it from, of course I love you, of course I forgive you, I need a little space right now. Right, so affirm the relationship, because you don't want to leverage the relationship, because then that's shame, right? Then you lose your platform really for leading this whole thing. So you want to, like, of course I love you, Giovanna, right? But I need a little space right now. It's frustrating, right? And that's okay. That's okay, because it is.
I was just gonna say sometimes they know exactly what they're doing and how it affects you, but then other times, like my 20-year-old niece we've raised, when she was a teenager, like she honestly sometimes had no idea the tone that was coming out of her mouth. Like she would have such a strong attitude with me, and then I'd be like, okay, you need to tone down the attitude. She's like, I don't have an attitude.
All I said was.
Right. So
to get off call.
like if I had recorded that conversation and could play it back for her, I really think she would, like it would be different in her head. So I think try that again, right? Like I do that with my 4-year-old, but it's the same, I guess, as they're older. Like okay, maybe you don't hear how you're saying that. Like try it a different way. And even now, like sometimes she like doesn't quite perceive how it comes across to other people. But yeah, I just want to affirm, like that seems like a really helpful tool to help them be aware. Now sometimes they know what they're doing, like but But yeah,
and
they
always
don't.
says that she didn't yell, she didn't raise her
Mhm.
voice. She,
Right.
Yeah, you did.
This is part of a bigger situation that like, so for a 4-year-old, like, you just don't get to talk that way. That's like, you don't get to have an opinion in how this is going to go down because you're 4. But as we walk them from this place where they're entirely dependent on my decision making to, like, I have seen and known, 20-year-olds that cannot make a decision, certainly not a good one. So this process almost demands conflict. Like, there's no way to give them this space. And I think that one of the things that I have done well is recognize this, but I don't know how to implement this. Like, I've had this talk with now 2 of my kids where kind of laid out, like, this is what's going to happen, and there's going to be conflict, and that's going to be okay, but we want to put some parameters on the conflict, and this is what I expect of you in the conflict that we're going to walk out, because we're not going to see eye to eye. You're going to want more privileges than I think you should get for this level of responsibility, and it's okay if we don't agree, and in the end I am going to be the authority, but like, so we've set rules like, some things have to be, we have to talk about it later, we talk about the house. This is not the kind of thing we do in public. Or I don't know quite all the best ways to implement that. So I think I feel like it's a great concept that I don't know how to apply. Like, how do I allow for the conflict that is mandatory in going from, total dependence to essential independence, complete independence, because that's, we have to agree at every single point along that graph in order for there to be no conflict, which is never going to happen. And I think this is one of those areas, but I feel like, they're all sort of part of this model, and I don't know, like, I don't know, I feel like the kids were really receptive, like, yeah, Dad, that sounds great, but then I didn't have anything, like how to give them anything practical from there. So you could just lay out.
Kind of what I tried to do right here. So I do think there is. I think you're exactly right, Seth. That you're not going to like, this doesn't exist without conflict. And I think your point of, so when the conflict comes, like, we need to talk about it, right? And we're gonna need to address it. And I think to kind of connect some of what you're saying is, but we're gonna talk about it in a certain way. And so if you want to be part of those conversations, which are shaping what are your privileges related to responsibility, then I'm gonna expect a certain degree of maturity. So I know that there's been times where I've pulled my son out of the ability to even have that conversation. Like, I'm sorry, you can't talk to your mom like that. So we're gonna have to be done. So we're just gonna make the decision because you're not able to interact with this in an appropriate way. He loves when I said that.
One thing that we notice is that our oldest daughter is incredibly independent and capable, but she's just got a mouth on her. And the thing that was perplexing every year, it's always perplexing. We go to parent-teacher conferences, and the teachers always say, "Oh, Becca is so incredibly respectful and kind." And we're like, "Wait, Becca?" We gotta double check. And so when she gets that way with us, it's like she saves everything up for home because she knows that we're safe.
Yeah.
And then when she says those things to us, then disrespectful things, then I always put the question on her: would you talk to another adult this way? Would you talk to your teacher this way? And she knows she wouldn't. And then she kind of rephrases whatever she's trying to say that way. Sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, well, we deal with something very similar to that. So we've kind of in our house talked about privilege as relationships, because relationships are not guaranteed, and we get the same thing from the teachers. We're respectful, and then we come home and we're like, yeah, you respect other adults, but you don't respect us. And we talk about future relationships that she will go through, and how if she does not handle those relationships responsibly, she will not have the privilege of continuing with those relationships. Right. So we use family relationships that we have as loss of responsibility means the loss of having that tight, close relationship with those people. and I agree, and I, like, sometimes they know what they're doing and sometimes they don't. And last summer, my daughter was giving me attitude, and I turned on my phone and I said, "I'm recording you now. What do you have to say?" And her attitude and her tone with me totally changed. And we talked about how you know what you're doing, even if you tell yourself, "I'm not talking with attitude." And so every once in a while, when she gives attitude, try to remind her, like, "Are you really talking to me in an appropriate way?" And that's difficult, because I feel like if I'm playing the short game, I get very angry.
Right.
But if I think about it in the long term, when I get angry, she gets angrier. And then we build on top of that. And if I can calm myself down, and sometimes not even address her, it makes her calm down.
Yeah.
And then, in the future we can have those conversations of what was really the problem. Because we get so sidetracked with I'm angry at you, now I'm more angry at you, and that just builds.
Our time is up, so okay. Thank you, Lindsay. So 2 things. There's prayer in the library for those who would want to be prayed over as things are coming up for you. Please take advantage of people that are there that would be willing to pray for you. There's lunch available to you out here, and you can get your lunch and come back in here, and we can continue the conversation. So I will be having my lunch in here, so if we want to keep talking about this. But these questions are in line with really what I'm saying during this stage, is you're setting a vision for what you want, and then you are leveraging, responsibility and privilege to grow your children towards independence and maturity. So these are the right kind of conversations for us to be having. So, all right, thank you. Thanks for being here.